So anybody who's got a van for Alex and Louise, so they can come and pick it up, please, they really just need a van, and we haven't got one, so if you know anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mandy's waving.
Mandy's waving.
Oh, is she?
Mandy, we'll come to you in a sec, but I just want to follow up something to do with Fiona. You know, we know she's been on the most immense roller coaster ride, health-wise, spiritual battle-wise, all kinds of things. And she recently has had some amazing God stuff happening as well. Tell us about when you had to go in the ambulance and God gave you the word for the paramedic fee.
Oh yeah. So that was only last Tuesday. So I'd already been into Bournemouth the day before. On the Tuesday, I was in the line to get into A&E, and it's called Halo. And it's funny, actually, it's called Halo.
Yeah.
You know? And one of the paramedics, I already noticed there was something really special about him, and I couldn't really speak properly, and I couldn't move at all. And in my very broken English, I said to him, "You, something special." And I said, "Like aura, but me Christian." And he went, "Ah," and he said, I'm me too. I'm a Christian." And then all of a sudden, I just heard this word, and I said, "You, 5 children and wife gone." And he sort of looked at me quizzically. I said, "Passed?" as in wife, as she passed away. And he went, "No, she's left me." And then I just felt the Lord saying, I just said, "The Lord says to you, he knows the pain in your heart." And he sort of looked a bit serious. I said, "Wait." I said, "The Lord knows the pain in your heart, and he wants you to know that he really, really loves you." And he was just like, "Wow." And he said, "How did you know I have 5 children?" And I just looked up to heaven like that, and he just couldn't believe it. And he said, "I am so pleased I met you." And then he had to go. So it's amazing how even with a body that was paralyzed, it could hardly speak, but yet God still came in and loved on somebody in that situation.
Praise God. That's just amazing. Because we had this Bible verse on Thursday that we were looking at about how through suffering, Jesus' leadership was made perfect. He was matured through suffering. He was perfected through that. And I immediately thought when we were reading this verse of Fee in that moment where she was about as weak and vulnerable as she could be, but the Spirit was, made perfect. The gift of the Spirit was perfected or made mature or strong or clear in that moment to really encourage another and really be really a sign and a wonder to this guy. Because another verse in the Bible was how God confirms his words with signs, wonders, and gifts of the Spirit, and how this is how we know when it's really authentic. The preaching of the word is authenticated by those things. So thanks for sharing that, Fee. That was brilliant. Amanda, I can't wait to hear what you've got to say then.
She's got a van. That's what she's going to say.
Oh, don't steal her thunder. Go for it, Mandy.
I've got a van. So
really,
we see her.
Yeah. I love my van. Yeah, what's it you need shifting, Fiona?
Well, it's bedroom furniture. It's a king size bed, 2 bedside cabinets. Sorry, guys. And a chest of drawers, and then like a tall boy chest of drawers, and it needs to go to Louise Coulson's house and Alex. And I think they're in Corfmullen, yeah. So maybe liaise with them.
Get another guy.
But are you friends with her or?
Yeah, I know Alex and Louise really well.
Yeah.
It's whether we can get some strong, able-bodied blokes to do some lifting.
Well, Yeah, well, Greg and George are here, but it just depends whether they're on calls or not. But if Alex could come over, he could just drive over in his car, and then it would be ideal if he sort of helped to dismantle the bed, so he knows how to, reassemble it his end. But yeah, if you could just reply to, they've put it up in the Lighthouse social. If you could just reply to her or just private messenger her, that would be brilliant. Oh, Mandy, you are an angel. Thank you.
No worries. So if you can liaise with when your husband and son are around.
They're here full time. It's just whether they are. It's up, the calls. But
perfect.
but if Alex can come over, then we can.
Yeah, we'll sort something. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
It's
just trick or treat too,
isn't it? It's being church. If any has a need, you can meet it. That's brilliant. I'll give space just for one more bit of good news if there is something that someone would like to share.
Actually, I've got something.
Yeah.
Caris, Paul and I took her to Bristol University yesterday, and we got her settled into her room. She's got a lovely big bedroom, huge big bed, lovely space for her desk, and yeah, she's left home. But I know, I blitzed her room today as a form of therapy. But the good news is she's on her course, she's in her first choice, and she's already networked, making friends.
Good.
And yeah, I'm really excited about how God's going to use her, in the vocation that she's picking.
Yeah.
So bless her heart.
Absolutely.
She's worked so hard, but that's our good news.
Yeah.
What's she
We're going to do
Mandy?
some praying towards the end, and it would be good to remember, Caris, because these transfer times in our lives can be really opportune times, can't they, for God to move, bring in new friendships or opportunities. So, sorry, Karen, what were you saying?
No, I was just asking Mandy what she was studying.
Yeah.
She's studying law.
Right, okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, brilliant. Very, very good indeed. So we just celebrate that you've brought Caris and Mandy to this point successfully, through all the ups and downs. And thank you for this next year, for all the good things that are going to take place, both back here at home for Mandy and Paul and for Caris. Yeah.
Amen. Thank you.
Very good. Did any of you guys get to hear Rebecca this morning?
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, really good.
Very good.
Just take a few minutes to, get some feedback on that. Any comments, things that struck you from what Rebecca was talking about this morning about from the Book of Acts, about dealing with disputes and when we don't all have the same view on something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jane, go for it. Would you like to say something, Jane?
Yeah. I thought she spoke very, very well, and it was very clear, and I found it very helpful. Because I faced a few situations like that, and it just very helpful to just think things through. Yeah. And her advice was excellent, actually, really excellent. And however much we are working hard not to take offence, but other people do, don't they? Or other people cause offence. So there are going to be disputes, whether we are dealing with Christians or non-Christians. So it's really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyone else want to say anything on the subject? I think it's very relevant because, at some stage in our lives, we're all going to hit up against some pretty tricky situations. One big testing time for us was with neighbours at one point. And, it can be really challenging. In fact, Jeremy and Yvette shared on Friday's Gospel According to how, an enormously tricky time for them with neighbours. Actually, God used to mature them and to change them and to develop them. So yeah, it's not about, you know, the avoidance of things like that being what we're after. It's how we handle them, isn't it? So very, very important.
Yeah, I thought it was really good just to be talking about that topic, actually, because
Yeah.
I mean, as Christians, I think we're very poor at disagreeing with each other.
Yeah.
Because we have this sort of idea, aren't we? We have this idea that we should be holy, that we should be, you know, we should be blessing people and being calm, and somebody really annoys us, and that doesn't fit with this image that we have. And what do we do then? I mean, I think our temptation is to walk away and not to, I mean, you know, just to walk away and either walk away from a church, walk away from people or whatever. And it's not that it's also, I think, sorry, I forgot her name. What was her name again?
Rebecca.
Rebecca, yeah. It was good that she, I mean, even Paul and Barnabas, after this great big discussion, Paul and Barnabas had a barney and they fell out. You know, and I think as Christians, I think it's really important that, you know, what joins all of us together is Christ. You know, we love Christ, we love Jesus, but we all have different, you know, perceptions, and we're all different people, and we will disagree a lot. I mean, you know, the reason there's different denominations is because we've fundamentally disagreed on things, but you know, it's still so important, isn't it, to find some way of, I may never agree with you, but I want to find some way of relating in love that is actually more important than that, so I can respect the fact that that's your position, although I don't agree, and you respect mine, and we love each other in that. You know, and that's I really appreciated that, because we're not generally, not here, but just generally as Christians, we're not. I mean, when I became a Christian, well, donkeys years ago, and that was in America, and everything was just, I was walking on clouds. I had discovered the meaning of life, and everything was just falling into place. And I came back to work, and one man who had sort of really spoke to me about Jesus, and I had mocked mercilessly for years. Actually, it was awful. But this Christian man was he was actually subordinate to me. And he became completely insubordinate and impossible. And it was just dreadful. And I said, Lord, how can this be? You know, and that took 6 months. I mean, we became the best of friends. Actually, for me, I remember one morning I was driving down to work, and I was at my wit's end thinking, this is just awful. I can't deal. And then I realized that I was being arrogant. And I repented of that arrogance there. And when I went into work, the situation was gone. So it was obviously me was the problem in that situation. But it's very true. I think God will, and you can see that in scriptures, God puts people that will cause us insurmountable problems. You know, and they're insurmountable problems because we need to change, don't we? You know, I don't like changing. I love the way I am. You know, changing is not.
You are Irish.
It's not bad. Nobody else does, but you know, never mind.
Yeah, so true. So
and
true.
I think it doesn't matter what group you're in, whether it's a church or it's a dancing group or whatever. I mean, like even the group I formed out in Saudi Arabia when I lived out there. There's just these group dynamics that go on. And I just think, you know, God is definitely talking to the Lighthouse about unity and about family, etc. And I think, like David said, we've got to find a way through that. And I think, and I certainly, when I felt God calling me back to the Lighthouse, and I was thinking, oh no, how am I going to manage this? And then he just showed me that if I ever felt anyone was, you know, whether I ever thought anyone was saying anything or anybody was saying anything about me, that my job, my role in it all was to forgive them and continue to love them regardless. And I found that, you know, a really, really fundamental thing that he's shown me. And I think because it is hard when we're all on different levels with God, you know, in terms of, you know, when we've all got different abilities and you know, all that sort of stuff. I think it's very hard for you guys as leaders, all of you, to navigate. And I don't, you know, I don't envy your job one iota. But I think, you know, forgiveness and love are the way through, really,
Absolutely. Thought she asked a very good question at the end, which was, while I've been talking, who are you thinking of? Because that helps us to realize if there are still relationships and situations in our lives where there's a bit of an ouch still. And that was a good question, I thought. And I definitely see now that earlier in my walk with God and in the journey of this church, I made mistakes. If there was a dispute or disagreement or something like that, I would get anxious as if there was something wrong going on, instead of understanding this is normal. This is normal. And, you know, if you've got two powerful people in a discussion about something, if there isn't any of that, it means one of them is not saying really what they think. So, you know, this is normal, and to not be afraid, to learn to not be afraid when that happens, because being afraid, if I get afraid about something, it doesn't bring out the best in my response. Okay. And then the other thing I realized I used to do wrong was I would try harder to persuade somebody that what I think is right. I try harder and harder. And
Phil's got very quiet.
That's not what it's about. It's not about, you know, turning somebody's mind round on something or winning the argument or something like that. But particularly the Danny Silk stuff has helped me to understand that the point then is for me to try harder to understand them. To understand them, to say, I need to understand why you think this or you feel this, and be respectful and honouring of that, even if I don't agree at the bottom line, as I think David was saying, that we can peaceably relate and love one another and support whilst holding different viewpoints. So yeah, it was, I thought that was very good. Beverly's been patiently waiting. Come on, Bev.
Well, I heard once one of the best talks I'd heard from one of our elders in Bristol about criticism, and it's kind of shaped my mind, my heart, and our life ever since. It was such a wonderful talk. He said he was a very introverted, he was a doctor who was an elder, very sensitive. And I'll share it all from him because he said it so well. And he said that if anyone gave criticism of him, he would lock himself in the room and not talk to his family for 3 days because he thought it was awful. And, you know, that someone should think that of him, it absolutely destroyed him. But he said what he learned to do, which totally freed him, was when anyone said anything critical, he would go to another elder, someone of more, same spirituality or more, and say, look, so-and-so said this about me. Would you pray about me? Is there anything in this that I need to change? And then he'd go back to the elder or whoever he shared it with, and they'd say, well, actually, 99% of what that person said is their problem. But there's 1% actually that could be changed. Yeah. And so what he did was went back to that person and said, like supposing it was Sue that said that, and Sue, and I'd say, you know, I've shared it with so-and-so, someone she knew, and I've asked them to check what you said, and he felt that there was this fact that we'd really like you to pray about for me. Would you pray for me on this fact and forgive me? So you ask them to actually pray for you on that fact that it was his. I talk too much, perhaps it might be, or whatever it is, or I gossip, whatever it is. I'm sorry. Would you pray for me on that?
Yeah.
Then will you forgive me and then bless me?
Yeah.
And then they go away because they've been honored.
Yeah.
And they forget about the other things they said about you.
Absolutely.
You know? And I just think that is so freeing. You know, if someone says something, check it out with someone. Don't go down the pan because someone says something. check it out. Is there any truth in it? And if there is, we want to be changed. We don't want to stay like that.
It takes courage and vulnerability, doesn't it, to do that? But when somebody displays that courage and vulnerability, it always brings out the best in the other, doesn't it? I'm always moved when somebody shows something like that, and it does bring you together, which is really good. Thank you, Bev. That's great. I wonder also whether you noticed Debs's demo today, the popcorn one. You know, if our hearts are open and childlike, then God can speak to us through the simplest of things. So she was aiming that as kids to show about how a bit of heat and pressure brings transformation in our lives. But I thought the two, Debs's thing and Rebecca's thing, sat well alongside each other because of that.
Very much so.
Yeah, and because it's about transformation in us, as you so rightly said. That's really, really good. Thank you. I'm going to give a few minutes now to Phil to share a few thoughts he's got with us, and then we'll take things on from there. So is that okay with you, Phil?
That's all right by me.
This? Okay then, darling, off you go.
Yeah, so this isn't a word per se, but it's a few thoughts that I've been having just lately. As I've been sort of, you know, often I'm thinking about what we're in at the moment, and it is the most bizarrest time I think that any of us can remember, probably, with all the different things going on. What's kind of brought it to a point tonight is that, of course, we're on the first part of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement in the Jewish calendar. And it's quite a fascinating time because all of this time there's kind of several festivals that all run in a row, and it started with Rosh Hashanah about a week ago or 10 days ago, I assume. And then there's kind of the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and then it goes on to the Feast of Tabernacles sort of after that. And it's kind of a very active time. And we've observed, myself and Bryony, as we talk together and all of this, that it's quite often a time of year when things change and things really begin to shift and move. And we've observed it in business and in personal life and in church and all sorts of things. It's kind of when something, you know, begins to happen. And I was very interested to read. I always get a bit nervous about saying these things in front of David and Susan there, because they're kind of the world's expert on all of this sort of stuff. But I'm sure they'll add some bits in at the end if I kind of mess it up a bit. But one of the things, obviously, the Day of Atonement was the time when the high priest went into the tabernacle and went behind the veil and went in once a year with blood to make atonement for the whole of the nation of Israel, for everything that had happened on the previous year. So that's a given, that, you know, it was a time of repentance. But actually, when you look at what Jews think now, I mean, if you actually look on some of these Jewish sites and everything about what is Rosh Hashanah and what is Yom Kippur, what is the Day of Atonement, Rosh Hashanah, apparently, they see it as a time when God writes, it's the Jewish New Year, so it's the first day of the new year for the Jews. But apparently at that time, they believe that God writes in the book of life plans for the next year for them, for individual people. And then you have this sort of 10-day period, the days of awe, where they're kind of very reflective and they try and repent of anything that's gone wrong over the previous year, and they begin to look forward, and they kind of do a bit of a sozo on themselves, you know, to try and kind of deal with everything that's happened over the previous year. And then by the time they get to the Day of Atonement, when it's all done, and they actually greet each other and say, may the plans that God has for you in the book of life be sealed on this day. So the plans are written down on Rosh Hashanah, but they're sealed on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And I mean, generally they felt you had to be good and you had to repent and you had to kind of get things in order so that on Yom Kippur, when atonement was made, you were ready to launch into your new plans for the new year. And they would often greet each other with, may the plans that God has for you be sealed this year on the Day of Atonement. And so I sort of began thinking, like, I know God has some amazing plans for us. I feel it. I can just sense it. And it's bizarre, isn't it, that all of this stuff's going on in the background, and yet we're sensing that God has these amazing plans for us that are beginning to emerge and birth. And one of the things that I began thinking about, and forgive me for kind of messing up the chronology of all the feasts and everything, but I thought that the time that we're in is kind of a bit like when Israel were in Egypt and they were actually coming out of captivity. You know, they were in slavery, right? And it, you know, life was not good because the cries of Israel were going up to the Lord, and he heard their cries and said, you know, sent them a deliverer, and they was going to rescue them out of slavery. So, you know, things weren't good generally. They were in slavery. It was hard work and all of that sort of stuff. But then suddenly Moses comes along, and Aaron, of course, and there's this big showdown between Moses and Pharaoh. And what was bad suddenly started to get a lot worse. It was like there was all these plagues, and there was frogs, and there was blood, and there was darkness, and there was you know, all of these different things, flies and boils and all sorts of unpleasant things that were breaking out left, right and center. It must have been a very, very confusing time for them, you know, when someone's come along and said, right, God's going to take you out and lead you into your promise. But actually, when they look around, it's like, oh yeah, you know, so if that's true,
going from bad to worse.
Why is all this happening? And I know that I felt like that, and I know that a number of others have kind of felt like that as well, that, you know, we've got these incredible promises that we feel God is leading us into, and yet all of this stuff is sort of beginning to happen. And I I just sort of really began to think, yeah, this is pretty much the same, that actually there's a time where particularly the church, okay, now I think he's doing something across the whole of the world, because I think he's leading us into a time of harvest at this time. But all of these things, you know, just like with Israel coming out of Egypt, you know, all of those things had to happen. Why did God do it that way? Why did it? And I've heard various different things over the years. I've heard Graham Cook talk about how each plague was kind of released, that a particular principality was being dealt with that was ruling over the area, and all of this sort of stuff. But whatever happened, you know, God ordained it such that they went through this process. They went through this process that kind of led them to a place where suddenly they were stepping out and stepping into the promises that he had for them, like going into the promised land and all of that stuff. And I thought, this is kind of what we're in at the moment. There is all of this stuff going on, and just when you think you've got one thing sorted out, or you've got the measure of one thing, kind of something else bubbles up and the next plague gets released, you know, and all of this sort of stuff. But all of the time, you know, rather than actually getting despair and things like that, there is this huge sense of anticipation and expectation that is beginning to rise up, that actually something extraordinary is about to happen. Something, you know, amazing is we're going to be stepping into. And so, you know, it does mess with your theology a little bit, where you think, okay, so because, you know, God sort of ordained all of that stuff with Egypt, didn't he? And I think if you go back and read it, it actually says he sent the plagues. And I know Bill Johnson would have a few problems with the fact, you know, can stuff come from God? Can bad stuff come from God? And I'm not going to go there tonight, whether he did or didn't, or whether it was permissive or active and all of that sort of stuff. It doesn't really matter. But the fact was, he actually allowed Israel to go through that. And I think he's allowing us to go through this, and that there is something very fundamental going on underneath, a foundational work that is going on in our hearts and in our spirits to prepare us for what we're going to step into, which is primarily sort of harvest. And it sort of feels like, you know, just like with Israel when they were in captivity and coming out, they sort of knew a certain type of lifestyle, which was kind of turning the handle on life. They'd get up, they'd make some bricks, they'd eat some food, they'd, you know, come home, they'd go to bed, and there was a certain rhythm of life which they were used to. And basically God stripped away everything, didn't he? He really just stripped, and even at one stage they even went into lockdown, didn't they? Because, I mean, they were in lockdown because they were in slavery anyway, but at one stage they had to go into their home, shut the doors and put the blood on the lintels and posts and all of this sort of stuff, and they had to just kind of wait until the angel of death had sort of passed over and stuff. And that was the night where they took all the firstborns and all of that sort of stuff. So, but as they came out, you know, and they had their Passover lamb and all of that stuff, and they had the feast, and but then they came out and went out into the wilderness, and really, I mean, what could they have taken with them? Not a lot. It really, what can you carry? What can you take with you? What can you get on a cart or a backpack or something? They were literally leaving on foot, weren't they? Most of them. There weren't kind of like removals firms in those days that you could have booked in to come and take all of your furniture and all of that sort of stuff, you know. That I think they literally had to leave in quite a hurry. That's kind of was the sense of how they had to eat that meal, you know, with their cloaks, with their belts on, and the kind of staff in their hand. They had to be ready. They had to be ready to go quite quickly. And so as they left, that literally, you know, pretty much all of their life was stripped away. They couldn't grow anything anymore. They couldn't do anything. They were completely reliant on God. They went out into the wilderness, and of course they had this amazing time where God provided. I think God's been doing a similar thing to us. He's been stripping away some of the fabric of our society, which we've become very reliant on. And maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit more to come yet, because I think we you know, we've had our freedoms taken away. We've had the lockdown. We've had our social interaction sort of taken away. We've had our church services taken away. We've had our worship taken away. We've had to go around in masks and all of this sort of stuff. But the thing I don't think we've really touched on yet is the economic side of what's going to happen. And I've got a feeling underlyingly there's something sort of like quite huge that is got to be kind of released yet in that respect, because it's one of the things that we're very reliant on. The Western world is very comfortable with its resources. You know, whatever happens, it thinks it can fix it with either money or medicine or plans or whatever. So, but I feel like God has been allowing some things. He's been stripping away some of the things that we've been confident on, and he is going to lead us out and into our promise, where we become fully reliant on him as a pillar of cloud, a pillar of fire, water from the rock, manna from heaven, quail, you know, miracles happening, the partings of Red Sea. I think he wants us to step into this realm of supernatural activity, of knowing him as a supernatural God, not just a God who kind of blesses us in the good stuff that we're doing. You know, we've had a lot of years of that, of doing what we can do, and we can do it quite well. There's certain things we can do, you know, with kind of worship and media and film and resources and money and all of this sort of stuff. But I feel like he's saying, okay, that's good, well done, you've done all of that. Now, shall we do it my way? Shall we do it kind of in God's way, releasing kind of power and seeing it done in a completely different way? So you know, I feel that's where we're at. I think that's kind of a little just picture on what is going on at the moment. The last interesting thing that I will say is that, of course, the slightly enigmatic thing that happened as all of this was happening, you know, and I've described the situation generally, the stripping away, the leaving quickly, the not taking much. But there was this very odd thing that happened right at the end where they went to all of their neighbors and said, oh, give us all your gold and silver, will you? Go. And of course, all the Egyptians handed over all of their valuable stuff before Israel left and gave them all their gold and silver. And it's bizarre. It was a bizarre thing that happened, because when you're not taking much and, you know, and you're kind of packing your bag and your mum saying, only take 2 pairs of trousers because you've got to carry them, then suddenly there's all of this gold and silver, which they have no use for because there's no shops. There's no, but God has given, and it says, doesn't it, as Israel left, they plundered the wealth of Egypt and like took it with them. And of course it would be for an appointed time. Yeah. And it was for the building of the tabernacle. It was like, because God already had the plans he was going to download to Moses about building this tabernacle, and it would have gold and it would have purple and it would have all of these beautiful things and that. And so that preparation was made, and those funds, those resources were released ahead of time in order to do that. And that's the thing I'm really sort of pressing in at the moment, because I feel there's certain things that we should be doing at this moment, and one of them is building the building. And I feel like as we're coming out of this sort of captivity stage, even though it's rough, even though it's kind of bizarre, even though we may go into a huge economic depression or recession or whatever you want to call it, even the markets may crash, I mean, anything could happen. I've got a feeling he is going to, in that moment, release those funds to us, because we need to kind of build these things ready for what's coming. It doesn't need to happen when the thing has come. It needs to be ready. We need to make the preparations now, and we need to kind of get going on these things. So that's kind of just a few little insights and what I feel like God has been saying to me as I've been just waiting on him and musing on the circumstances. I haven't got really the first idea what's going on, but you know, this is what I feel like he's saying. And so you just go along with it, don't you? So, yeah, there you go.
So I think Phil, you're saying that in the most unlikely of times there'll be a supernatural transfer of wealth when the economies of the world are going through all sorts of challenges and crashes, that we still believe that he will provide for the plans that he sealed for the year, which are really important. Thanks so much. I'm just going to add a couple of thoughts to what Phil has said. One is to share what I think is a really encouraging testimony that I read in the last week or two from my Celtic daily prayer book, and it documents some of the amazing and miraculous things that have happened in the British Isles over the centuries, okay? And this story is all about Iona. Have you ever heard of the place Iona? Yeah. Where there's a community there. Which was originally established by this amazing Celtic saint called Columba, and then gradually fell into disrepair. So I'm just going to take up the story. It's only one paragraph, but I hope it will encourage you too, because it's along these same lines as Phil's been sharing. So in 1938, so just before the outbreak of the Second World War, a guy called MacLeod arrived with a handful of 12 craftsmen without jobs. Half were students for the ministry on Iona, with the aim of rebuilding the fallen monastery. And he tells the group that they needed money to get the project started. And to do something about it, MacLeod wrote to the richest man he knew. And that man replied that he should see a psychiatrist at once, that he was mad. But then MacLeod asked, and MacLeod was a pacifist, a guy called Sir James Lithgow, who's a builder of warships in the Govan shipyard, okay, in Scotland. He wrote to him, and this guy was interested, but asked if he would give up his pacifism if he transferred the £5,000 that he was asking for. And MacLeod said, no, not on your life. And so he replied, then I will give you the £5,000. Okay. So we got the money to do this, but because it's the outbreak of war, actually getting the materials was very, very difficult. You know, the money wasn't the answer. What he needed was the materials to do the building. And so this is what happened next. Materials were hard to obtain. The war was on, and the government commandeered all timber. But the ship coming from Canada struck a storm and jettisoned its cargo of lumber in the Atlantic, and the timber floated 80 miles and landed on Mull, immediately opposite Iona. And all the lumber was the right length for putting the roof on Iona's library, and it's still there today. Wow. And that story and that testimony fed my spirit, fed my faith that in the middle of a pandemic, God is able to do, even with a handful of 12, you know, students and out of work craftsmen, what he says he's going to do in a remote place like that at wartime, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I just chip in with my little testimony there to share with you. But also in that passage of scripture that Phil was looking at from Exodus, there's a slightly different twist that I'd just like to bring to our attention. And it is at the beginning of that time of deliverance, beginning of Passover, Exodus 12, verse 3, there's this thing where each household had to lock themselves in by a certain time, and they had to each get a lamb, didn't they? Being part of the wider community of Israel was not going to hack it. Every household had to actively respond for themselves to enter into the next stage. And so I just wanted to bring up this word households again. Alistair did a great word about it some weeks ago, about households. But I feel in my spirit that it's something that we need to be thinking about and praying about and active about with greater vigor right now. The whole thing of in this period of time is not for us just to sort of stick our heads in the sand and wait for the months to go by until we can kind of gather again or something. That there's something supposed to be happening now that intends for us to lay hold of. And I think it's household by household. I think it's every household really getting hold of God again for ourselves and laying hold, being activated in our faith, getting hold of that lamb of God for ourselves and being ready to move like the Israelites with their, you know, gowns tucked into their belt or whatever it was, ready to move. And so really would love you to join me in praying. This is one of my sort of topics of prayer at the moment, that every household will lay hold of what God has for them at this time, and that where there may have been some passivity in the past because we're just part of a bigger thing and we just trot along on a Sunday, that in this time, instead of falling away or growing cold or disconnected, every household becomes more active in faith and more active at reaching out and connecting with other brothers and sisters to strengthen and encourage, pray, support, help out, etc. And my last little thought, because time's running away now, is about table time in the household. This may be a theme that we take up in coming weeks and months. The power of having a meal together with somebody, and if you can't offer hospitality, meeting someone for coffee, or even Zooming with a coffee. But, you know, creating that table time feel for fellowship, for connection, for strengthening one another, for understanding one another, going deeper, you know, giving time to hear one another. So obviously, whilst observing the rule of 6, you know, whilst observing the rule of 6, if your health permits. So there we go. I want to really encourage us to use the freedom we do have to meet up to 6 people, to do that wisely and sensibly, and to think about, you know, who in the coming week you could connect to in some way to facilitate, encourage, and so on. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Very good.
Good. Now we've got a few minutes to pray. And so I think instead of going into groups, Phil, what we might do is I'd like to challenge you, look at the screen now of all the different faces and identify one person on the screen that you're going to pray for. We're going to mute ourselves so we don't all hear this, but we are going to pray out loud for another person on the screen for a minute, all right? And then when I do something crazy like that, stop, and then we'll do another minute's prayer for another thing. So identify in your own mind who you're going to pray for, mute yourself, and then pray out loud and really pray for that other person for a minute, okay? Are you ready? Steady. Go.